Head of Pre-Sales at Kaspersky. Good afternoon, Fabio. And then we have Lior Tabansky, Head of Research Development at the Cyber Research Center at Tel Aviv University. We are going to be being joined by Eugenio Santagata, CEO at Chelsea, in a half an hour. So I'd love to start with Corrado. Corrado, can you please show us the picture, the frame of these particular issues on cybersecurity, maybe focusing also on ransomware and so on? If you'd love to, I appreciate to hear from you about public administration.
Hearing me, because I also connectivity issues. Today is a very bad day for that meeting. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I apologize for not being able to be there in presence. I'm very sorry. I had issues at very last moment, so I had to resort to online connection. Apologies again. Okay, thank you for introducing. Briefly draw the, let's say, big picture of the threats in those last few years, because the landscape of cybercrime has very strongly changed in these last few years. Just 5 years ago, let's say, we were seeing the first attempts of targeted ransomware. That is not ransomware that was spread around via phishing, via emails.
Corrado, we have some issues with your connection. We can hear you. We can't. Can you please try to stop the video? I can't hear you. Try again. Corrado, can you hear me? I think it's his testing. Sorry for those issues. Corrado, can you hear me now? Okay. No, non ci sente lui. Okay. So I move to the next guest so we can check those issues. Professor Marchetti, so you are here, and no, yeah, I think so. So let's focus on automotive sector and issues for this particular sector, and also for the businesses in this sector.
Okay, so well, this is something I really like to talk about. This is something I'm really interested in. So if I go too long, please just stop me. I am Mirko Marchetti. I'm a cybersecurity professor at the University of Modena and Reggio Emilia, and my background is rooted on traditional, let's say, cybersecurity. So cybersecurity issues for IT networks, for personal computers and stuff like that. And it has been a few years since I started working about cybersecurity specifically applied to the automotive domain. And I have to say, well, I would like to say that it was my choice, that I saw a big issue, a big problem that needed some research and I jumped into it. This was not the case. Okay, so I was actually called by automotive industry. So I have the luck of working in Modena, which is a city, well, probably mostly known because it is near to Ferrari. So we do have quite a lot of very nice car makers nearby. And they went to us, they went to the university since they had some trouble and they didn't know exactly how to solve them. And why did they have this kind of trouble? Well, the problem is that the automotive landscape is changing quite rapidly, and there are several trends that are now affecting the automotive domain. Of course, you are probably aware that there is the trend towards electrification, so huge changes in how vehicles are made, but I'm not really interested into electrification, okay? I mean, if the engine is an internal combustion engine or an electric engine, well, yes, it might have some consequences on cybersecurity, but this is not what I'm most interested in. The other two trends that directly affect cybersecurity in the automotive sectors are the huge increase into the functions of the vehicle that are controlled by software, together with the huge increase in connectivity. So just take a look at old vehicles, okay? So the older vehicles you can remember. Most of you are quite young, so maybe something going back to, I don't know, 20 years ago or stuff. This kind of vehicles were almost purely mechanical, okay? They braked when you hit the brake pedal, not when they decided it is a good idea to brake, okay? And take a look at cars right now. And I'm not talking about autonomous driving, okay? So this is something that will come maybe in the future, that will have its own problems. I'm talking about the cars that are traveling in the road right now. Cars that are not fully autonomous, but that have quite a lot of advanced driving assistance systems, such as adaptive cruise control, okay? Quite standard feature on recent vehicles. If you have adaptive cruise control on your car, it means that your car can accelerate and can decelerate, okay? So it can apply brakes, it can increase the vehicle speed. Lane keep assist. Your vehicle can detect if you're going out of the lane and can also correct this kind of trajectory. Your vehicle can steer. Park assist. If your vehicle is able to park itself, then of course the vehicle is also able to accelerate, to decelerate, to apply brakes, and to steer autonomously, okay? This means that we do have some sort of computers inside of the vehicle. They're called ECU, electronic control units. Some of them are pretty much similar to a normal personal computer, or maybe to a smartphone. Others are more similar to microcontroller stuff you normally find on industrial devices. And these kind of electronic control units are connected through a network that runs inside the car and controls all these features by software. So you do have safety relevant features that are controlled by software. And we do have a little problem here. Software has bugs, and the few bugs actually can be exploited by people with malicious intent. I'm not going to call them hackers. I'm going to call them cyber attackers, okay? In order to cause some sort of things to go quite bad, okay? So just picture a situation in which an attacker can compromise the infotainment system of your vehicle, okay? The car radio. It is no longer a radio. It is a personal computer with one operating system, actually a couple of different operating systems on top of that. You can connect your smartphone to this computer, so it has Bluetooth, and there is a wide range of well-known Bluetooth software vulnerabilities that can be exploited. You can install mobile applications directly on the infotainment system. Picture a situation in which an attacker manages to take control of your infotainment system. What can an attacker do? Well, actually, this is not something we have to guess. We do have already published experiments from people, I mean, American universities, University of California and San Diego published a very nice research paper 12 years ago about the consequences of cyber attack on vehicles. We do have technical white papers by known hackers. These two are hackers. They're not cyber attackers. It is different. Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek. They actually managed to take full remote control of a licensed, unmodified vehicle. Okay. In this particular case, it was a Jeep Cherokee. You can find a nice video on YouTube about how they managed to completely disable the engine, to completely disable the braking system, and to also cause some sort of limited steering control. Okay. So this is one trend. Software can directly affect safety-relevant features of your car. And the other trend, which is very relevant for cybersecurity, is connectivity. So everyone in the automotive industry knew that the internal network of a vehicle is not secure in a traditional manner, okay? We do have secure protocols, we do have secure network in the IT domain. Well, they're not perfect either, but I mean, at least there have been quite a lot of steps forward. None of these technologies can be directly applied to the internal network of the vehicles since they are too simple, okay? They use protocols designed in 1980s or 90s or so. No security whatsoever. So the whole security model of the automotive industry relied completely on the fact that the car is something you cannot connect to. It's a closed network ecosystem. It's an air-gapped network. Okay, well, after years of experience in cybersecurity, my understanding and my personal opinion, I might be wrong, but my personal opinion is that no matter how hard you try to completely keep a network disconnected, no matter how hard you try to create a fully, really air-gapped network, you will never be able to do so. There will also be some sort of connection, being it a network protocol, a shared device, a USB stick. And this is evidently not the case with modern vehicles, which are directly connected to the internet. eCall is a feature that is mandatory in all vehicles, and it is required when you have a car crash. Your car can, well, if it is a crash of some, I mean, airbags get deployed and stuff like that, your car can automatically contact emergency, like law enforcement agencies, and can call emergency vehicles to the place in which you had the car accident. So, okay, so the vehicle is connected to the mobile network. The vehicle can transmit data, such as GPS coordinates of your car, through the mobile network. You can connect to the internet using your vehicles, okay? So this evidently is no longer the case. And the huge problem happened when attackers actually realized that from the internet, from the outside, from hundreds of kilometers away, possibly from the other side of the planet, you can actually call a car. You can connect to a car. You can exploit some services, some vulnerable services that maybe the car maker or the supplier that sold the infotainment system to the car maker had left open. And this actually paves the way to cyber attacks, which are fairly similar to normal cyber attacks against a traditional IT target, being carried out within a car. And so this is a huge problem, okay? So the automotive industry started to take this kind of problem seriously around 2016, like 5 years ago or so. And we are witnessing some improvement, which are also mandated by recent regulations from the United States and recent norms from ISO and standardization bodies. But there is still quite a lot of things to do in order to actually improve the security of road vehicles and be, I mean, relatively safe against cyber attacks.
Thank you, Professor. Corrado. Corrado, let's try again.
Yes, can you hear me and see me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Corrado.
Thank you very much. So I have to apologize twice. Once for not having been able to be there in presence with very last minute issue. And the second for my connection problems that I hope are solved by now. So thank you again for having invited me. Apologize again for those issues, and I will resume what I was trying to say a few minutes ago. I'd want just to draw the, let's say, the big picture, the landscape of modern threats, cyber threats, and how they have changed in those last few years, because we have seen a very strong acceleration in either quantity and quality of cybercrime attacks. Just a mere 5 years ago, we were saying the first attempts to targeted ransomware attacks that were quite new at the time. It's just 5 years ago, it seems 30 years ago. At the time, the most common, for instance, ransomware attack was that one made by phishing emails that tricked unconscious clerks or people to click on the attachment and get infected. So sort of shooting in the bunch or phishing with the net. Not really targeted attacks, but we were seeing the first attacks coming out. For instance, I remember in February 2015, the first attack on an hospital premises. It was in the United States, in Utah, if I recall well. Nowadays, those are the most common kind of attacks. Most serious attacks are targeted. That is, there is a careful choice of the victim, a careful study on which is the best way to inoculate the malware onto the systems, not relying just on the clerk clicking on an attachment, but doing more sophisticated attacks based on tricking people, but also real break-ins into the network, as, for instance, it happened in Regione Lazio a couple of months ago. Everybody knew about that, but in that case, it was a very surgical and targeted attack with people that broke into the network of Regione Lazio using stolen credentials of a system administrator, tried to delete the backups and then manually injected the malware onto the most critical systems, domain controllers, and so on. So it was very sophisticated, but this is the rule right now. The serious criminals do those sort of things and try to employ new techniques, also based on human factor, so social engineering, in order to convince people to do the things that they shouldn't, accessing one site, installing something, and so on, even by calling them at the phone or trying to make the people believe that they are what they are, and so not relying also on mail. Another kind of attack, which is quite common right now, is the so-called supply chain attack. That is, the real target gets not be attacked directly because probably it is quite protected, or it will be difficult. So the criminals attack some smaller company which work for the real target, which are smaller, unprepared, not so conscious about cybersecurity, so they are most easy to break in. And once they break into those smaller companies, they can attack the real target, posing as a legitimate user of that small company, which is on the supply chain of the real attacker. This also requires a lot of preparation, a lot of work. You cannot improvise such an attack, so it's usually very carefully planned, because you have to understand all the network of your target, but they are very, very effective. So we are looking at a quite impressive jump forward of the ability of the cyber criminal organization to perform their job. But of course, this is expected, because in nature, the predators are always smarter, faster, and nastier than the victims. Otherwise, they would have been extinguished centuries or millennia ago. So it's very difficult to cope with this changing ability of criminals, but of course, that's what we have to do. The one who attacks is always an advantage to the one who defends. Nevertheless, we have to outsmart our enemies, our attackers, and try to prevent them from doing that by, for instance, learning from the mistakes made by other people. It's a very challenging scenario.
Thank you, Corrado. Professor Tabansky, I think that Corrado raised a big question too. So how to deal with attackers? I spent two years ago, I spent 1 week in Beersheba, and the word I listened more frequently was ecosystem. I don't know if you want to mention this approach, this Israeli approach, but I'm going to ask you how to deal with attackers, both for businesses and governments.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to the Center for American Studies and for Mickey for having me here. It's great to be back, even remotely. There is a tendency to think about cybersecurity in the realm of technical expertise, which Professor Marchetti very expertly presented. So, for example, a car is a system of systems. Now, if you introduce humans into the system, then it becomes, I don't know, what Americans call a cyber-physical system or something like this, or socio-technical system. Obviously, wherever people are present as users and so on, things will be more complicated than a purely technical approach. So there are some examples I want to mention. I want to mention actually 3 things. The first is we are talking about socio-technical systems, and even if the technical part would be perfect, it will only slightly reduce the overall risks, both of failures and of targeted threats. The second thing is the balance between, let's say, attackers or malicious actors and our societies. Again, there is a tendency to see this as a static situation where we focus on what the bad guys are doing, but we don't pay enough attention to what the targets in the society could do or have not done. So in this perspective, look at the again, the ransomware, the best business model currently for cybercrime. Most of the attacks come from abroad, and the Bitcoin funds are transferred to all sorts of accounts and then cashed also outside of the Western states. However, our defense and law enforcement organizations, all they can say is to issue declarations, and Americans sometimes in retrospect come after the attackers and try to catch them. No one on the state level thinks that it's actually their job to directly defend at least the large civilian targets, be it hospitals, be it important services, and so on. So this anomaly remains in most countries for some 30 years of civilian attention to cybersecurity. There are no easy solutions, but at least what we as citizens should demand is that the state that takes out taxes, and we expect the police to do something to protect us, states start to do something more. And it is this in this context, it's quite interesting to see the different approaches between developed states. So let's take, for example, the critical infrastructure protection topic, where we know that some targets are more important than others. And then we decide that the state has to intervene somehow and to help the society to minimize the risks of them failing. It can be large banking institutions. That's why we have banking regulations against systemic problems. It can be perhaps large medical institution. And then there are different approaches. The traditional one that remains prevalent in Western Europe or in the United States is some sort of voluntary advice. Someone will issue good and important advice what to do, but then it's up for the general manager of this hospital or the bank to decide whether they should spend their effort on this or focus on their core business. And this obviously has problems with market incentives and so on. The other approach is regulation. So Americans quite a few years ago decided that privacy risks and threats to medical information are important, and eventually brought this HIPAA set of rules, which impose rather severe punishment on the managers of the private or public medical healthcare organizations for breaches, which sounds very good and rational. This regulation-prone approach is something that the European Union also likes very much and tries to regulate risks in advance and with different penalties. One of the side effects of HIPAA regulation was the dramatic rise of incentives for ransomware organizations to hack into American healthcare systems. Why? Because the risk of penalty, including fine, from some federal agencies on a hospital sets some sort of a minimum price under which it's better to pay the attackers and close this deal under the table rather than acknowledge the breach, talk to the authorities, and then suffer the consequences. So this is a major human problem. It's quite straightforward when we think about it. And this is behind the reason of several years that American hospitals and clinics are suffering such threats and prefer predominantly to negotiate with the ransomware group, transfer the money with the help of legal advisors that enjoy the privilege of client attorney secrecy, and so on. So last week, or even before that, there was the first successful ransomware attack on an Israeli hospital. Whoever did it, it looks like it was a criminal attack. Whoever did it didn't do their market research properly. Right? Israeli hospitals will not have funds to pay the attackers. Moreover, in our case, the national civilian cybersecurity directorate steps in. This is the one that is operational and resides in Beersheba, steps in contrast to most Western similar organizations that I know of, perhaps with the exception of the British and CSC. In our Israeli system, the cybersecurity agency has no law enforcement function, and has no prosecution function, and has no intelligence role. So yes, they know that the target was negligently managed and protected from the IT point of view, but what they do is trying to help them back on their field, and they eventually go after the attackers through the different capabilities of Israeli different parts of the security system and perhaps allies. So such enclosure, it is a political and social issue to a large extent. Again, it's a matter of incentives, at least for both for the commercial motivated attacks, financial motivation, and certainly for political motivated attacks. So if you have an enemy and your target is highly protected, state-sponsored enemies usually have much longer appetite and much longer breath to go after you and try to achieve their objectives, be it espionage or something else. And therefore, I think that it's good that we see in recent years a big increase in public attention to cybersecurity. Sometimes trivial, not important things, but in other cases, events that have severe implications. And I hope that this will eventually drive our governments to try, experiment, and develop better ways towards securing our life, not only securing our life, but actually this level or sufficient level of cybersecurity is an essential precondition to reap the benefits of digital transformation. This is something that already 10 years ago, the Israeli national strategy explicitly said, and there are some other countries that also view it not only as a security risk, but as a foundational capability to achieve sustainable growth and increase in quality of life for the citizens. That's the bright note I want to finish with. If we start to push our politicians to get things, to move things ahead, we have some good results to expect, not only higher security and lower risks. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tabansky. Eugenio Santagata, welcome in this webinar. Good afternoon, Eugenio. Now I move to Fabio San Martino, which is head of pre-sales at Kaspersky, and I'd like to hear from you, Fabio. How does threat intelligence can contribute to protection?
Good afternoon to everybody. I would apologize for my connection by remote. I was supposed to be in presence, but unfortunately some issues with the connection flight affected this possibility. So apologize for that. Coming back to your questions, I think it's very important that threat intelligence will be a center topic in the current discussion about cybersecurity strategies. it's crucial to be aware of how the landscape of cyber criminals and in general the threat landscape is moving, and that's what the threat intelligence is supposed to bring is knowledge. Basically, is knowledge about the the groups, the cyber criminal groups, the new techniques, the operation activities that they are using, what kind of infrastructure, what kind of tools are currently using to affect to hit their targets. I would connect to the Corrado introduction because it is very interesting to analyze how the phenomenon of targeted ransomware evolved across the times. If we look, for example, 5 years ago, cyber criminals, a group of cyber criminals were mostly interested in other kind of targets. The majority of the very big attacks with, or at least the attacks with an high impact on the monetization part of this kind of job were targeted to financial institutions and were not related to the ransomware, but mostly steal of money. If we remember, for example, Carbonac, but not only, this is not the only case. We need to come back to 2016, if I'm not mistaken. But what happened in the meanwhile? Why now we see a totally different typology of victims that the cybercrime is cybercrime groups are targeting, because in the meanwhile something has changed. For example, the techniques changed. 4 or 5 years ago, the main attack vector was phishing and browser hijacking or browser code injection to drive the user to execute some code that download the Trojan and then establish connection. It was quite easy because the security of the browser was not so high at that time. In the meanwhile, the browser developers spend a lot of money in fixing their vulnerabilities. I'm not saying that the browsers are totally safe now, but are less easier to compromise. From one side, and from the other side, even the groups, the cyber criminal groups changed their structure, their way of working. If we look especially to the Russian groups that are the most active in this case, in this period, in terms of targeted ransomware attacks. They changed their structure, their internal structure. Previously, some years ago, the groups of cyber criminals were composed by a lot of people that with the high level developer skills that spend a lot of time in looking for new vulnerabilities to leverage. Now, the tactics has changed. From one side, because it's much more difficult to compromise an endpoint, so they start the infection via from an endpoint, because there are several levels of protection in the middle. Also, the browser, for example, is not cannot be attacked anymore easily. So now the groups are looking for to leverage one-day vulnerabilities. It's not more efficient to look for 0 days of vulnerabilities because are very hard to find. They cost more on the dark web. access to a zero-day vulnerabilities can be very, very expensive for a cybersecurity group. Sorry, for cybersecurity criminal group. And so it's much more efficient to leverage to the vulnerabilities that are already there, that are already in place. So the ecosystem changed. A few years ago, we had large groups of cyber criminals that with very specified roles inside, and very well connected each other and linked each other. Now we are assisting to a new kind of landscape where the cyber criminal groups are composed but are very fragmented. There are, in the last 2 years, we saw as Kaspersky, our researcher, so the rise of a huge number of new small groups that with no specific skills in developing, for example, because now the approach is much more to purchase on black market the access from another group that is maybe specialized in compromise the first level at the first level the companies, and then they resell on dark web the access to the infrastructure of the victim, and the second group that is specialized on ransomware attack purchase this access and then finalize the attack, encrypting and exfiltration and exfiltrating the data. And in some cases we saw another type of groups that is mostly is acting as a service group for the others, that is only called to manage the financial conversation with the victim, just to manage the how to get the money from the victim. So they simply act as a kind of customer service. It's a very complex situation in this moment. And the huge number of cyber criminal groups also means that there is that those groups exchange information to each other. And the way how they are exchanging information is changing as well. Few years ago, we assisted to a lot of movement, a lot of chatting, a lot of communication via forums on the dark web, of course, and in protected and private forums. Now, because most of them are closed or because can be tracked, and also because the direct communication channel is better and more secure, they are talking each other. So they are going back in the shadows, and those groups communicating directly, not in public places, and not so public places, but quite public places, like as in the past. Even this approach is much more complex for those companies that need to defend. No? We are trying to do as Kaspersky, trying to provide such kind of information about how the cyber criminals are moving, are changing their approach, and even how the tools that they are using. For example, we are not assisting anymore to the usage of classic Trojans, backdoors, leverage of classic vulnerabilities. It's much more common for those groups in this period, in these times, to use, for example, penetration testing tools that are very popular, easy to use, and can have a great effect and very quick compromisation of the victim.
Fabio,
So
I'm sorry to
they
interrupt
threaten
you. I'm asking you to move
Yeah,
to
sorry.
conclusions. Thank you.
Yes, I was concluding. I was on the conclusion. So what we are trying to do, and what is bring to the customers, to our to companies that are trying to create new strategy of protection, those kind of information to address better their attention, what is important, what is relevant, and what is not, and try to build a safer cyber security strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio. Eugenio Sant'Agata, I'm just very curious to hear from you about those issues. Can you hear me? Eugenio?
Good afternoon, can you hear me?
Okay. The floor is yours, Eugenio.
Thanks, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting. I think that a lot of issues were thoroughly assessed. From my standpoint, I can say that 2021 will be remembered as a pivotal year in terms of magnitude of cyber attacks, but also quality of cyber attacks. For example, the attack surface became much, much bigger. This last August was a month that kept us all participants into the cybersecurity game very much awake because a lot of attacks were perpetrated through the supply chain. And this poses immediately very urgent issue to address within the threat evolution landscape. Should only the OEM or the provider of the core technology be certified or be obliged to put in place a cybersecurity strategy, or also its supply chain? So that is a key issue that remains today unanswered, and that needs to be solved within our national regulatory scenario quite quickly. Second point, delving on what has already been said in terms of evolution and new threats, I'd like to speculate more on the ransomware phenomenon. Firstly, because TELSI, which I have the honor to guide and lead, which is part of Team Group, is this year marking its 50th anniversary since foundation, and its core competencies still lie on cryptography. So everything that has to do with the protection of data, with the encryption of software, with the decryption of software, and so on. So ransomware is very much at the heart of the new TELSI cyber strategy. Now, in this respect, I have been lucky enough to work on a number of cases, and we took home some lessons learned, which at the end of the day form a multitude of factors that make this kind of threat particularly poisonous for the year ahead. I would say for the next 3-5 years at least. First of all, because at least in our country, basic countermeasures such as multi-factor authentication still lag behind. It's something that it's still hard to find thoroughly and soundly implemented throughout, I would say, the industry. Second, user error is still there and will be there, will stay with us no matter how much cybersecurity awareness we do. We can demand from Mrs. Lucy in accounting to have the expertise to ascertain which PDF is malicious and which PDF is not malicious, since her job is very much process oriented. So I'm afraid that this is something that we can't do much about user error, and user error is very much at the core of campaigns like ransomware. Third, remediation, EDR, MDR, as all CISOs know, are solutions that in terms of response still lag behind. They amount for, their operations amount for significant delays, no matter what, no matter the specs, no matter the expectations, no matter the promises, whenever an attack kicks in. I would add to this what is called the living of the land binaries, meaning the difficulty in ascertaining which administrative tool, normal, even Microsoft or whatever vendor administrative tool, are malicious or not, whenever they perform apparently normal functions in administering a certain IT system. Last but not least, lack of coordination between public sector and private sector. Now, this gives me the chance to make a number of considerations on where we are right now. As it is known, the recently launched cybersecurity agency is a welcome step forward. In my view, in order to effectively counter evolving threats such as ransomware or others, while waiting for the regulatory scenario to be completed and the whole agency to be structured, we need concrete, immediate steps forward in terms of coordination between companies such as TIM, the world of small and medium enterprises that are very much at the moment involved into M&A, VC operations and stuff like this, but with complete lack of coordination with big groups, government, university, armed forces, and the financial world. So in my view, a committee, an initiative, a project that would bring at the table representatives of these stakeholders is necessary to make sure that there is, whenever possible, a coordinated answer to a ransomware campaign such as the one that was triggered in 2021 and that had a spike in August, in the last August. Last but not least, this is something I'm very much involved in right now, the study of new threats such as the keyword. So attacks brought forward on sensitive critical infrastructure that can result into the death of users, such as polluting, for example, the water system through a cyber attack, with no apparent reason. This is something that is not part of literature yet, but there will be part of statistics over the next 5 years ahead. So in all these, Telsi is in its new revised business model as the industrial asset identified within telecom to satisfy all the market requirements in terms of cryptography and cybersecurity involved every day, and that's where we're putting a lot of investments and a lot of effort.
Thanks a lot, Eugenio, for your intervention. And last but not least, I move to Professor Vaccaro, because Italy is the second largest industrial economy in Europe. And one of the most important issues nowadays, I think it's industrial espionage. So please, Professor Vaccaro, share with us your views about this issue.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for organizing this very interesting panel. The story of the issue of industrial espionage might be and should be framed as a part of economic war. If we think that we are in a period of peace, we would be mistaken. The reality is that we struggle in many situations to speak about competition, but we can speak about war. And corporate espionage, which includes industrial espionage and includes any kind of organizational espionage, is a shortcut. Is a shortcut for countries and companies to catch up with new technologies. This means that Europe and the US are extremely exposed because they have companies and they have national know-how that might be extremely appealing and interesting for emerging companies. And I'm not thinking only to the Far East. It's extremely, I believe it's extremely important to take into consideration the numbers, okay? We don't have clear numbers, but a recent study by the US Commission on the protection of intellectual property rights has estimated that just in the US, the damage related to industrial espionage or corporate espionage might be estimated to $600 billion. Okay, and the point is that I really appreciated the discussion and the presentation of my colleague from Modena, Professor Marchetti, because if we look at the technological innovation expenses now, at the top world level, we have automotive companies. We would expect IT companies, Amazon or Microsoft or Apple. No, now we have Volkswagen. And if we just look at the shift, the increase of R&D expenses of the top 10 R&D companies in the world, it increased just in 1 year of around 15%. Between the 2017 and 2018. So what does it mean? It means that if I am a company and I want to catch up, the cost of paying a private company or engaging my government to do in this espionage activity is much lower and much shorter in terms of time than building the necessary knowledge and the necessary technologies. Okay, so we are incredibly exposed. Now, until now, in this interesting panel, I heard technologically related issues and mostly we spoke about external threats. And I could keep speaking for hours about these. What I would like to say is that we have also significant problems related to internal espionage. Internal espionage starts when someone within an organization has incentives or motivations to acquire information and to steal information that have a strong value for the company and for the market. And during the last years, and I'm not going to enter in detail, we have seen the immersion of new, very interesting and scary dynamics. For example, in the book I published with Rubettino last year, I presented a new category, a new dynamic, a new construct of internal espionage, which is acted by the so-called boundary elements. Boundary elements are those individuals that are professionally very, very good. And at the same time, they play in the legal market and in the legal one. So they play in both networks. They are very well considered by their colleagues internally and within the professional community, and they acquire information that they sell in the legal market. This is emerging more and more. We don't have statistics, but the combination of my professional activity and the research activity of my team, of my center at IESE, is proving that this is emerging more and more. And this is related to a broader context, market dynamic, which is the emergence of gray markets. Which are gray markets? Gray markets are those markets in which you combine original and legal products or services and illegal services. Okay, so it happened to me just a couple of weeks ago to be contacted by a client in which, this client discovered that a national seller or reseller was combining original products with illegal ones, and he was shocked of the copies of these illegal ones, which were perfect. Why? Because there was someone inside that was capable to transfer all the technology and the critical knowledge. The last consideration I would like to leave, I have seen an audience of juniors, and I'm mostly a professor, so I'm sensitive to juniors. Here there are three things I would like to leave to them. First, people who are supposed to protect companies, compliance managers and security managers, often are not so sensitive to the industrial espionage, and they underestimate the risk within their companies. So we have a cultural issue to take into consideration for the next 10 years, in particular in Europe and in the US. Second consideration, we have 20 years of research proving that culture is relevant. If we wanted to prevent dynamics associated with corporate espionage, we have to work on corporate culture. And trust me, guys, this is not just rhetoric. We have research that prove that when you create within an organization a strong ethical culture, the probability that this company will face in the future compliance-related problems, and in particular espionage issues, goes dramatically. The risk goes dramatically. And the third issue is related to the equilibrium. We cannot, people acting and undertaking corporate espionage activities are professionals. We have private companies, we have governmental companies. We cannot pretend our employees are our managers to behave like James Bond. So we needed to protect companies, but we cannot stress too much organizational culture. On the other hand, we need professionals in security, in IT, in security department, in human resource management departments that are capable to protect employees and management. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Vaccaro. So I think that, I guess we raise a few questions from the audience, and guys, please feel free to raise your hand for questions. The guys over there, thank you. I'd like to collect 3 or 4 questions and then move to our speakers.
Thank you very much for speakers. My name is Shinichi Mizuno. I'm a second-year student of global governance, and I'm from Japan. So a few days ago, I read an article regarding ransomware attack, which is hacker attack important network structures and ask for amount of monies in exchanging for stopping the attack. And it is reported that China and Russia are partly involved in this kind of hacker attack. And against this attack, initially, the United States of America built a corporation so-called Five Eyes. The other day, USA invited almost 30 countries, such as including Japan, Australia, South Korea, and some European countries to the online conference regarding about cyber attacks. I believe that the intention of the US is to share tactics and solutions among them. So my question is, in your opinion, would building this international cooperation be a better way to tackle cyber attacks issues, like keeping China or Russia from attacking? Like, in my opinion, making this kind of cooperation is a great idea, but at the same time, I'm also afraid that this can stimulate China, Russia more, because in a sense, we are excluding them. So, so I will repeat my question. So in your opinion, would building this international cooperation be a better way to tackle cyber attack issues? And yes, that's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Simone. I hope you can hear me. First of all, thank you for your time and for your speech. I really liked it. My question would be a little bit less technical. So I believe a renovation of cybersecurity infrastructure is key to minimize the risk of future attacks. However, to do that, an incredible amount of resources, both money, monetary and time, is needed, and common civilians are still not interested in such matters. This makes, of course, social pressure on companies and governments less likely to be of any relevance. How do you think that we can better pass a message to normal people who are often unaware of such kind of attacks without falling into like a common behavior and without making it like a crisis that doesn't exist? Like, how to communicate that the risk exists without making it too much technical and arriving to people that do not know anything about it?
Thank you. Any other questions? We have a geopolitical one and then one focused on civilians. So no questions. So I move to Corrado. Corrado, we have, as I told you, a first question about geopolitical and cooperation between countries. The counter ransomware initiative last week was a great example of the efforts by the Biden administration involving 32 governments in a virtual summit at the White House. Italy, was involved in and represented by Undersecretary Manlio Di Stefano at the opening speech. And the second question is about how to get people involved. So, Corrado, the floor is yours. I'm asking you to stay in 2-3 minutes each speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriele. I will start from the second question, which is probably easy to respond. It is, of course, a matter of increasing the culture of the day in the street on this problem. The fact is that we had no time since those technologies come, affordable to everyone, and the risk arose. In other kind of technologies, let's say cars, for instance, many decades, almost a century has passed since it was something difficult to do just for a little elite, and now we see grandmothers that bring grandchildren to the school with their car, think that one 100 years ago was not even thinkable. So society needs to have some time to grow the consciousness of the problems inherent to certain technologies. In the case of internet and all the related problems, we just hadn't enough time to do that. But there are a lot of initiatives going on. For instance, very few people unfortunately knows that October is actually the month of cybersecurity, at least here in Europe. It is something that was started almost 8 or 10 years ago by the Commission, just to create the culture of the security of the technology. I wouldn't even say cybersecurity. Let's call security and privacy issues of modern technologies, and bring to the attention of the men in the street to these problems. So we have to increase the level of culture on those problems, talking about those problems at schools, not only in specific university courses for tech guys, but to the average student of high school, just to inform them that technology has some problems, and that is a matter of behavior to avoid those problems, like exactly we do with cars and with other problems. So we need, of course, government to push more on this. Certain countries are more active on that, other countries are less, but a long of things have yet to be made to raise the culture. On the geopolitical side, well, the problem is complex because, of course, we need more cooperation to tackle this problem. But at the same time, there are players that don't like to cooperate because they have interest in playing on the, on the other side. No news on that. For instance, an international arrangement on espionage has never been made because every state, of course, doesn't want other states to espionage on them, but they want to espionage on others. So espionage is the most active sport in political. Everybody is doing that, and nobody admits it's doing that. So it's impossible to, set out a treaty that would ban that because nobody would adhere to this treaty. In this field, of course, we are all compact in combating cybercrime, but there are, of course, many states that would like to be on the offensive side of the security, just to maintain power, to maintain superiority. So it's, in my opinion, very difficult to ever reach a treaty on that, or just a consensus on that.
Thank you, Corrado. Professor Marchetti, the floor is yours. I don't know which one question, both the first one, the second one.
Okay, I think I will start from the geopolitical one. So let us take it down first and go back about what happened and what still happens, not to attack between nations, but to attacks that are basically motivated by money, so to cyber criminals against organizations, against like industries, okay? And industries do not really like to share information about the attack they received in most of the cases, because it means that they received an attack and this is not a signal they want to send outside, okay? However, in the IT domain, in the traditional IT domain, we learned the hard way that exchanging information is the only successful strategy to win this kind of war, okay? Economic war in that sense. And this is not something all companies like, but this is something they are starting to do. And this is also what motivates public and private partnership for cyber defense in the traditional IT domain. Now, let us take it up. Let us go to geopolitical aspects that are not motivated by money, okay? So, of course, motivations are different. You do have different actors that are much more complex, that are even more, less willing to exchange information. But I think that if these initiatives happen, it's because even at this level, decision makers understood that information sharing is important and is something you cannot avoid. Let us assume that there is an attack group out there that managed to identify somehow a novel attack strategy. We cannot afford this attack strategy to be novel for Italy, to be novel for France, to be novel for Germany, to be novel for UK, to be novel for the US. This is not something we can afford. This attack strategy has to be new until it gets detected first, and then we should develop defenses and detection mechanisms that should allow us to identify these attack strategy and spread among, ideally, all over the world. Of course, this is a very ideal view. We know we have alliances among nation states. These alliances work in let's say, a cinematic in the war domain. They should also work with all the limitation we have in the cyber war domain. Okay, so this is, at least what I can say about the first question. And about the second question, so I started dealing with cybersecurity almost 20 years ago. And if you hear someone discuss about cybersecurity, it looks like, someone that speaks in the desert with no one listening, okay? And right now we are here talking about cybersecurity, and industries are going to the university about cybersecurity. So this is something that is actually happening. It takes time because humans' habits cannot just be changed as you change a configuration file in a computer. It takes time, it takes culture, you have to work at different levels. So one thing I like about this kind of topic is that everything has to do with the perceived risks. How do you perceive the risk of using a computer, of sharing your data? We are very good, well, at least most of us are very good at evaluating risks in the physical world because we are born in the physical world and we know it, okay? We have a lot of experience with the physical world. Not all of us has, I wouldn't say the same, but even a comparable level of experience in the cyber world. And if you do not know the basic laws of a domain, okay, we know gravity. We know that if a train hits us, that will cause quite a lot of damage. Okay, so we know some basic laws and we use these to estimate the risk. If we do not have any knowledge about what happens in the cyber domain, we will never be able to estimate the cyber risks correctly. And so there are a lot of talking about native digital people. Well, I think that awareness, cyber awareness, will actually be much more effective in native digital people as it was with respect to how it was effective in the previous generations. And just if I have one other thing to add, awareness is key and we have to do it at all levels. This isn't enough. We do have to put rules, okay? Seat belts in a car are compulsory. This is not something you can decide whether to use or not. Security of the financial, the IT infrastructure of banks greatly improved after very effective and very stringent regulations have been imposed. And so they were, of course, banks had to adhere to them, had to comply to them. And of course, not all the software is done into the banks. So these requirements have been pushed down to the whole supply chain. And this is how you make a complete supply chain more mature. Culture is good, you have to do that, but you also have to put regulations on top of that, and you have to make something compulsory, and you have to make people pay for their mistakes. This might not be, I mean, exactly very good news, but I think this is the only doable approach.
Thank you, Professor. Can you hear me? Yeah. Professor Tabansky, are you online? Do you have to go? You can share with us your thoughts about those questions very briefly.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Floor is yours.
Very briefly, we should not shift too much of responsibility to the individuals. Consider, I don't know, consider anti-terrorism policies, right? We could, or consider, I know, 60 years ago when we trained the kids in America to hide after if nuclear bomb will be dropped. That's one approach. The better approach is to act more proactively in defense and move to disrupt the organized criminal groups, which are not very numbered, and there are ways to get to them. Same goes for international cooperation. Once you realize that today cyber is not a niche, but through this domain you can get to so many different exercises of power, then the diplomatic realm is important but limited in what you can expect to get. The United States has its alliances already, and the great power competition concept that is prevalent in the United States strategy will not be influenced by that they need further cooperation with more actors. And yeah, then you cannot separate this, because again, this is not only a technical thing, but it's an essential instrument, potential instrument of power. And just one example, today we all depend on American infrastructure. So on one hand, Google and Microsoft and Amazon do a lot to minimize the risk to their users. On the other hand, I think it's not far that weaponization of the political control of companies will move on. And then many things that we take for granted today can become closed for people in different countries due to all sorts of geopolitical reasons. So the issue of strategic sovereignty, or I forgot the correct name, that is now in fashion in Brussels, is also something to take into account. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tabansky. Thanks for your time. Have a good day. I know you have to go. Hope to see you in Rome or in Tel Aviv. Thank you. San Martino, please. I don't know which question do you like to answer?
I'll try to answer both questions. For the geopolitical one, it's not easy to say. I think it's definitely we cannot imagine how the one choice or one another would affect the operations of the state-sponsored groups against each other. The state-sponsored attacks are mostly influenced by the politics in general. Not directly what the cyber groups, the cyber criminal groups are doing. So it's complex to answer to this question, but I would just like to remember that there are two different levels on this discussion. There are state-sponsored groups that are acting, and it's of course clear that they are doing this, but most majority of the groups have no defined borders. We talk about Russian-speaking groups, Chinese-speaking groups, Israeli-speaking groups, but it's quite complex to say if where they are placed. if they are acting with moved by monetization reasons or other reasons. It's a difficult stuff. In general, I can say that information sharing is always a good option for the defenders. Exchange information each other, it means that we can act in a fast way and react to cyber attack in a proper way. The second question, personally, as a cybersecurity operator, I feel difficult even to speak about cybersecurity risk with the IT operators, not only with common people. So it's quite complex. The beautiness of the technology is much more higher when the technology is transparent. And this can affect, of course, the perception of the risk in cybersecurity. So I do agree with Corrado here. We have to talk about the risk. We have to talk about what can happen if our behaviors as common people bring us to make some bad choices. It's much more than enough. It's no need to go in the deep in technical discussion. Why is not used to do it? Well, we shouldn't do this or that. Just talk about the risk. What happens if we behave badly or in a good way?
Thank you, Fabio. Eugenio.
There are very interesting questions indeed. On the geopolitical one, let's face it, guys, there will be no new Cold War or a similar type of confrontation, simply because it's impossible to hide the use of a nuclear weapon, whereas a cyber attack doesn't make any noise. At the same time, it's not reasonable and it's not realistic to not or to avoid bringing to the table the very actor that most likely attacked you. So what we are entering as this arena of cyber security enlarges and the conundrum of geopolitical issues kick in, what we're entering is an era that brings back the, in my personal view, old idea of Homo homini lupus, that goes back to hundreds of years to the philosophical thinking on Thomas Hobbes, whereby the wolves will be dining at the table with their very victims. It's impossible, because if you don't bring them at the table, there will be worse and worsening relations and worsening cooperation and worsening attitude on sharing information. Today, at European level, I would say that the exchange of information among agencies, although not formalized or very much formalized, works quite well. I've seen that as part of the game being critical infrastructure. But when we go beyond the boundaries of the European Union, and in this respect, the European Union plays a pivotal role in the future of cybersecurity affecting all of us. When we go outside of that, basically there is no rules. Because at the end of the day, you will have one actor today sharing information because it will help closing a deal of any kind on one table. On the other, the next very actor may have lost control of some groups that are of nationality of that actor that will be attacking you. How do you control all this? How do you manage all this? It will not be possible. But that's something that we have to face it, and most likely we have to name it the way it is, avoiding political correctness, because that will take us nowhere. So without attaching any negative connotation on this state or on the other state, whenever there is an attribution process, which is a well-known process in cybersecurity, that leads somebody or us to say it's been you, then you still have to invite that you at the table to work with you. Otherwise, the alternative is much, much worse. On the consumer or layman or common citizen issue, this is something that we should not leave either to the initiative of the private industry or to the single person involved. It's too much for both. The answer is definitely cybersecurity awareness, but cybersecurity awareness is something that requires a public involvement and a public spending and the public approach in putting forward a campaign through media, of course, as the preferred channel of information, through televised social media, to the web, through the web, and so on, about the risks associated. Nevertheless, there will be people, like there are people that are against the vaccine, for example, for coronavirus, that are simply not responding to that. In order to make sure that that arena will be definitely smaller compared to the big group, the state and the government must come in and launch massive media campaign on the risks associated on cybersecurity, exactly in the same way as it happens for campaigns regarding health issues like the one that we are living, or other examples of which our history is full.
Thank you, Eugenio. Professor Vaccaro, what about you? Professor Vaccaro, we can't hear you. Non c'è? Okay, he went out, so unfortunately he went out. I hope the two questions had good answers and you're satisfied with answers by our distinguished panelists. I would thank you, Corrado Giustozzi, Professor Marchetti, Professor Tabansky, Eugenio Santagata, Professor Vaccaro, and Fabio Sammartino for this event. I also would like to thank Diplomacy Festival for organizing this event, this hybrid event, and also for having me. And so I hope you to enjoy Rome and have a good day, and follow other events on Diplomacy Festival. I think it's the last day, right? So enjoy last events.
Yeah.